Morning, Sean.
Morning, Bern.
Sean, occasionally something significant happens and something appears significant to have happened in Europe. I remember the Cold War when there was an acceleration of nuclear capability and it looked dangerous. The president of Poland has now offered the West to cite a nuclear capability, presumably pointed the other way in his country.
Yeah, it's we're both old enough and ugly enough to remember the Cold War, and nuclear weapons felt like they were part and parcel of it. And there's thousands of them now pointed at from Russia to US and UK and vice versa. What's fascinating this last couple of weeks, though, Andrzej Duda, who's the president of Poland, has said he's offered to the West, if you want to forward locate nuclear weapons on Poland soil, then I'm happy to do that. Why has he done that? Well, part of it is because Poland has always felt a bit vulnerable. If Europe's feeling vulnerable, Poland definitely does. It's had a bad experience from a couple of world wars. And by forward deploying, potentially strengthening the eastern flank of NATO, he's offered to do this. Well, of course, immediately the Russian deputy foreign minister stepped up and said, this is outrageous. If they're forward deployed, we will be targeting NATO weapons. We'll be targeting them in Poland. But the irony of this situation isn't lost on me, and I'm sure not on a lot of people. Who was the last country to make a big fanfare about forward deploying?
I wonder.
Yeah, Russia did this. They did it into Belarus. They made the announcement in the middle of last year. We heard last month that they've just finished that process. So the irony of actually making all this fuss, and it's back to this banging the drum of nuclear rhetoric. Now, from a military perspective, there's no advantage in forward deploying nuclear weapons. The problem with forward deploying,
because you can send them from a long way off.
You can send them intercontinental ballistic missiles, travel halfway around the world. They go into space. They're quite difficult to target when they're up in space because they're traveling so fast. And frankly, if you start moving them around, you highlight where they are, because with satellite technology today, you know exactly where they are. So, forward deploying them, it gives you your enemy a lot. They can hit them a lot quicker than they can if they're
and with very conventional weapons.
Correct. Yeah. So this is all about politics. This is all about the optics, and this plays to the whole point that what Putin's done very effectively up till now is, because he's a nuclear power, he's been saber rattling to the West, because Putin knows if the West not just provided weapons, was actually to intervene into the war in Ukraine, was to actually put boots on the ground, Western weapons and a Western no-fly zone, Russia will be stopped in its tracks. And it can't afford to let that happen. So it's been rattling this nuclear saber every time it has the opportunity. But that has worrying consequences downstream, I think.
Part of me thinks that his sort of big inevitable reaction to it is all sort of puff and wind anyway, because based on what you've said, there is no actual advantage to having this nuclear capability on Poland's soil, so close to Russia. So why is he shouting about it? Why he just stay silent? Because it's everybody will know. I mean, you're a military analyst, I've just learnt something. Yeah, it sort of sounds common sense. Everybody knows what.
So part of this goes back to the timing. So Russia made the announcement middle of last year. If you remember, that was when this much vaunted spring offensive was due to happen. And Russia was doing everything possible to stop the West putting more weapons in the hands of Ukrainians, because he was very worried that, Ukraine, most of the West thought that they would make some sort of advance. And you remember right at the start of this war, Russia would have gambled that it knew if the West was to get involved, it could not have met its military objectives. So immediately that it started invading, it warned the West, don't get involved. When the West was talking about providing weapons, anti-tank weapons, right at the start, Russia went, provide weapons, you're risking in escalating the conflict. We did, it didn't. Yeah. Then they talked about West was going to put tanks in. Oh, it might escalate. Lots of Western leaders prevaricating. Russia threatening nuclear Armageddon. We put tanks in. It didn't happen. Same happened for long-range missiles, and even now. Well, even now, the German Chancellor does not want to put long-range missiles into the hands of Ukrainians, because it is worried, the Taurus missile, it's worried that it will risk to an escalation. And even the military briefings I have that from colleagues and from senior military folk, they say the reason they don't want to intervene is they don't want to escalate into a major confrontation with Russia. And you go, okay, I get it. But now let's look at it from Putin's perspective. Most of the world does not have nuclear weapons. It's only very few countries that do. If he can go into Ukraine and the West won't intervene, where else could he go into? We did a podcast not that long ago talking about, valuable minerals, didn't we? We talked about lithium for the battery industry. We talked about uranium for the power industry.
And sort of gradual control that Russia seems to be pursuing.
Exactly. So if Russia was to go into Africa, for example, and say, right, rather than just doing military support, we're going to take over parts of Africa. Last I saw, it wasn't a member of NATO, so that means that we do nothing.
So it's kind of indeterminate, really, where this might be going. I think most people who maybe don't understand the detail in the way you do would see it as an escalation. We know that Poland has been gradually increasing its percentage against its GDP, which has been growing anyway, so there's like an accelerating effect. I forget what it was last time we spoke, 3.5%. We know they're heading for 4%. From the President of Poland's point of view, this is yet another opportunity to flex his muscles. He's in the headlines all of a sudden.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think for me, you're old enough to remember this. I'm not. Point made.
Thank you. We're going to be talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I knew it.
No, but it was the last time that actually the world felt we were on the brink of world war, nuclear war. And of course, there was DEFCON 5, DEFCON 4, DEFCON 3. We actually got to DEFCON 2, and the world was shaking. I mean, this was back in 28th of October, back in 1962. But weapons, nuclear warheads being put into weapons. Aircraft were airborne on continuous patrol, ready to launch this stuff. That's what real threatening nuclear war feels like. We're nowhere near that today. Yet, because we have a generation that's never lived with that, Putin has been very effective at undermining the resolve of political leaders and saying, actually, we don't want to get involved because we don't want to risk a fight with Russia. But where does that leave us strategically around the world? Where does that leave China with regard to Taiwan? Where does it leave the West, given that resources, particularly minerals, fuel, stuff like that, are scarce? Whoever controls them will control the future. How do you stop a bully like Russia? Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute we want to get into a nuclear war.
You know what happened?
Go on.
With the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Phone call.
You'll know it from history books. I actually lived through it.
Yeah.
So I've got one on you, Sean.
Yeah.
Actually, it was solved by two savvy and possibly history might show reasonably mature individuals who decided to settle down. And there was a lot going on behind the scenes, but that seems to be what happened. Billy Joel's written a very good song about it, which is worth listening to.
I'm off to a Billy Joel concert and later on this year
in
Wales.
I argue this is his favourite song of all time. Very, very emotional, because it's a real story about him, and it talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis and turning the ships around.
But I think rather than going down memory lane, I think the reason we're bringing this up is that the really interesting point today is that I'm very concerned that if we, as the West, have taken a political view that we are not prepared to confront Putin because of the risk of nuclear conflict, thinking that through, where that leads us into the future, I think is very worrying.
Okay, make a guess. Is the West going to say, yes, we take you up, we're going to get ready to put missiles in Poland, or not?
I don't think it's about Poland. I think what's more interesting is that we're seeing just a gradual ratcheting up, and President
rhetoric.
And President Macron is pushing even harder to say that we should get involved more militarily on the ground. And at the moment, he's on his own. The irony here, of course, is that they're not NATO. If they're part of NATO, we'd help them. was only the other week that Israel was attacked by 331 missiles from Iran, and the West rushed in to shoot all these missiles down to protect Israel. Israel's not a member of NATO either. So we do it when it suits us, and we didn't think that was risking a nuclear confrontation because we weren't prepared to attack, but we were prepared to defend. Ukraine is defending.
Let's see.